G'day history lovers, it's me, Random History, and today we're going to be covering the tales of the brothers of Harold Godwinson. Before we get started, if you guys had any suggestions for future videos, be sure to let me know in the comments and I'll get around to it. But with all that being said, let's start off with Harold Godwinson's oldest brother, Sweyn, and work our way down from there. Sweyn Godwinson was born in the year 1020 to Godwin, Earl of Wessex, and a Danish noblewoman named Geitha Thorkilsdottir, some 2 years before his legendary brother Harold. Also, just one little thing, I'm not 100% sure if it's pronounced Sweyn or Sweyn, so if you guys do know, just please let me know in the comments and I'd appreciate that, but for the sake of this video, I'm just going to go with Sweyn. Not much is known about his early life and childhood, but it is safe to assume he grew up in and around the court, as his father, Godwin, held a very important role in English politics at the time. In 1043, when he was about 23 years old, he became Earl of the South West Midlands. His domain included Gloucestershire, Hertfordshire, Oxfordshire, Berkshire, and Somerset. He appears to have been active in Welsh politics at the time, and seems to have been involved in an invasion of Deheubarth in support of the King Gwynedd in 1046. Upon his return from this campaign, he abducted Idgefu, the abbess of Leominster, so pretty much a nun, allegedly with the intentions of marrying her and gaining control of her Leominster estates. So clearly not a charm at this one. In response to this, the king exiled him, where he would take refuge with Baldwin V, Count of Flanders in modern-day Belgium. By the summer of 1048, he was in Denmark with his maternal cousin Sweyn Estrithson, who was trying to establish himself as king. Shockingly, it is said he was also banished from Denmark, and according to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, had ruined himself with the Danes. Now being banished from Denmark for an unspecified offence, he was forced to return to England. His brother Harold and cousin Björn opposed his return, likely because they had profited greatly from his exile as his lands had been split between them both. Sweyn was eventually pardoned by the king, but Harold and Björn refused to return any of his previous lands. Upon hearing of this, Sweyn would take his cousin Björn hostage and later kill him, his own cousin. For this he was exiled again and condemned as a man of no honour. Somehow, in the following year 1050, he was pardoned again by the king, possibly due to his father pleading his case and using his political might. In 1051, Earl Godwin and all his sons were exiled from England following a dispute with the king, which I covered in more detail in my video, The Downfall of the Anglo-Saxon Kings Part 1. Sweyn would receive the sternest judgment of them all and was exiled for life a third time now, but this time he would never return. It appears this man, who some would deem as a psychopath, experienced a lot of remorse for his past actions and undertook a barefoot pilgrimage to Jerusalem to look to the salvation of his soul, in quotation marks. It was on his return from this journey where he would breathe his last. He would die on the 29th of September 1052 at the age of roughly 32 due to an illness he had acquired on his return from the pilgrimage. Now the next brother in the line is actually Harold Godwinson himself, but this video isn't about him, so I'm going to be skipping him and going on to the next brother, Tostig. Tostig Godwinson, who was probably Harold Godwinson's most famous brother, was born sometime between the years 1023 and 1028. However, it doesn't seem we can narrow it down any further than that. Not much is known about his early life, but it is safe to presume he grew up in the same court environment as his brothers. As previously stated, the Godwinson family was exiled in 1051, and he would return with them the following year. In 1055, he became the Earl of Northumbria upon the death of Earl Siward, and was apparently quite friendly with Edward the Confessor at this time. Tostig appears to have ruled Northumbria with some difficulty, as he was never popular with the Northumbrian ruling class, who at the time were a mix of Danish invaders and Anglo-Saxon survivors of the last Norse invasion. He was said to have been heavy-handed with those who opposed him, and actually murdered several members of leading Northumbrian families who resisted him, so he wasn't doing himself any favours. It is also possible he showed a lack of leadership against the raiding Scots. Tostig's lack of popularity made it difficult to raise local levies to combat the Scots, so he resorted to using a strong force of Danish mercenaries as his main force, which was very expensive and led to a further decrease in his popularity. It also doesn't help that there was some local bias in play, as Tostig was from the south of England, which was distinctly different than the north culturally. In 1065, his harsh rule reached a boiling point, as on the 3rd of October 1065, the Thanes of York, as well as the remainder of Yorkshire, descended on the city and occupied it. Under the occupation, all of Tostig's officials and supporters were killed. They then declared Tostig outlawed and sent for Morcar, a younger brother of Edwin, Earl of Mercia, to lead them. The rebels then marched south to press their case with King Edward, and were joined at Northampton by Earl Edwin and his forces. There they were met by Harold Godwinson, who had been sent by King Edward to negotiate with them, and thus did not bring his forces. After Harold, who was at the time the king's right-hand man, had spoken with the rebels, it is likely he realised that there was no way his brother Tostig would be able to retain Northumbria, and by the time the royal council met on October 28th, he had already made up his mind. At the royal council, Harold Godwinson persuaded King Edward the Confessor to agree to the demands of the rebels. This would lead to a confrontation between the two brothers at a meeting of the king and his council, where Tostig publicly accused Harold of working with the rebels against him. However, this is unlikely, as it is believed the reason for Harold siding with the rebels is because he wished to maintain peace and unity in England so the country could stay strong against a possible invasion. Regardless of his reasonings, Tostig didn't care and swore vengeance against his brother after he was exiled a short time later, probably due to him not accepting his deposition. After he was exiled, Tostig took a ship with his family and some loyal thanes to take temporary refuge with his brother-in-law, Baldwin V, Count of Flanders. He ended up travelling as far as Normandy, where he attempted to form an alliance with William, who was related to his wife. However, this appears to have not worked out. Perhaps growing impatient and with vengeance on his mind, in early 1066 he took a fleet provided by Baldwin and landed on the Isle of Wight in May, where he collected money and provisions from the locals. He raided as far as Sandwich, but was forced to return when King Harold called out naval and land forces. He would end up moving north after an unsuccessful attempt to get his brother Gurth to join him. On his journey north, he raided Norfolk and Lincolnshire. However, before long, Earls Edwin and Morcar would decisively defeat him, after which he was deserted by his remaining men and fled to his sworn brother King Malcolm III of Scotland, where he would spend the summer of 1066. At some point he made contact with King Harold Hardrada of Norway and persuaded him to invade England. One saga claims that he sailed for Norway and greatly impressed the Norwegian king and his court, managing to sway the unenthusiastic Hardrada, who had just finished a long and inconclusive war with Denmark. With Hardrada's aid, Tostig sailed up the Humber and defeated Earls Morcar and Edwin at the Battle of Fulford before he was ultimately defeated and killed at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. If you want to know more about the battles of Fulford and Stamford Bridge, I covered them extensively in my Downfall of the Anglo-Saxon Kings Part 2 video. After his death, Tostig's body was buried at York Minster. Now for the three remaining brothers, Gurth, Leofwine, and Wulfnoth. Bear in mind, these sections will be far shorter than Tostig and Sweyn's, as there is far less known about these brothers than the others. However, I will do my best. Gurth Godwinson was born sometime in 1032 as the fourth son of Earl Godwin. Yet again, not much is known about this brother's early life, although it is safe to assume that he grew up in the same court and noble environment alongside his brothers. He went into exile with his family in 1051 and returned with them the following year, unlike his oldest brother Sweyn. Following his father's death in April 1053, his older brother Harold became Earl of Wessex, and Gurth would succeed Harold as Earl of East Anglia, Cambridgeshire, and Oxfordshire sometime between 1055 and 1057. In 1061, Gurth apparently went on a pilgrimage to Rome alongside his brother Tostig and a few other nobles. It is believed that Gurth fought alongside his brother Harold Godwinson and against his brother Tostig at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. Before the Battle of Hastings, it is believed Gurth attempted to prevent Harold from engaging William in battle, stating, "My dearest brother and lord, you should let your prowess temper your valour. You have only just returned worn out after the war against the Norwegians, and now you are hastening to fight once more against the Normans. Rest, I beg you. You ought to contemplate carefully what you pledge by oaths to the Duke of the Normans. Take care that you do not commit perjury, and by this crime destroy yourself as well as the flower of our people, and bring everlasting shame to our posterity. I have sworn no oath, and owe nothing to Duke William, therefore I am ready to join battle boldly with him for my native soil. But you, my brother, should wait in peace wherever you like for the outcome of this war, lest the liberty of the English should perish through your ruin." Harold, however, would ignore his brother's plea. Gurth would die fighting at the Battle of Hastings alongside Harold and his younger brother Leofwine, who we'll get into now. Leofwine Godwinson was born in 1035 and was the fifth son of Earl Godwin. When the Godwin family was exiled from England in 1051, he went with Harold to seek refuge in Ireland instead of Flanders with the rest of his family. He returned to England the following year, but was not present at the deathbed of his father in April 1055 like his older brothers were. He was made Earl of Kent, Essex, Middlesex, Hertford, Surrey, and most likely Buckinghamshire sometime between 1055 and 1057. It is unclear whether he was present at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, however I think it is safe to assume he was. As stated in Gurth's section, Leofwine was killed in the Battle of Hastings alongside his brothers. However, it is unclear exactly how he or Gurth died or when in the battle. Some believe Gurth and Leofwine died after leading an attack on the fleeing Normans, which would turn out to be a feint. The Bayeux tapestry seems to show Gurth and Leofwine being killed surrounded by Norman cavalry, leading some to that conclusion. I personally think it's inconclusive though. One big issue with that theory though is that Gurth and Leofwine's bodies were found next to Harold's after the battle, and it is known Harold died much later in the battle towards the end. Some believe it is possible that Gurth and Leofwine's bodies could have been retrieved if this is true, and brought to Harold, which would have made him fight harder. I am personally of the belief that they probably died later in the battle alongside their brother, as I find it hard to believe their bodies could have been able to be retrieved and brought to Harold mid-battle. Regardless of where exactly they died, after the Battle of Hastings, all of Godwin's sons would lie dead, except for one, Wulfnoth, who we'll get into right now. Wulfnoth Godwinson was born in the year 1040, making him the youngest of the Godwinson brothers. During the conflict between the king and the Godwinson family in 1051, Wulfnoth was given as a hostage to Edward the Confessor as assurance of Godwin's good behaviour during the confrontation between himself and the king, which led to the family's banishment. Upon the Godwinsons' return to England, Norman supporters of King Edward, especially Archbishop Robert of Humieges, who was one of the main men responsible for the banishment of the Godwinsons, fled England. It is likely that at this point, Wulfnoth, as well as Harkon, the son of the late Sweyn Godwinson, were whisked away by the fleeing archbishop and taken to Normandy, where they were handed over to Duke William of Normandy. According to English historian Eadmer, the reason for Harold's excursion to Normandy in 1064 or 1065 was that he wished to free Wulfnoth as well as his nephew Harkon. To achieve this, he brought a vast amount of wealth, all of which was seized by Count Guy I of Ponthieu, when Harold and his party were shipwrecked. When Harold later allegedly swore an oath to William, agreeing to become his vassal and to support his succession to the English crown, one of the promises made by William in return, according to Eadmer, was that Wulfnoth would be returned safe and sound when William had become king. Harold's later ascension to the throne would break this alleged agreement, and Wulfnoth would not be released until 1087 by a dying, now king, William. Unfortunately, he was only briefly freed, as shortly after his freeing, the son of King William, William II Rufus, re-imprisoned him. If any positive can be taken from these awful circumstances, at least Wulfnoth was typically held in very comfortable, if not enviable, conditions. Sadly, Wulfnoth would die in 1094, still a prisoner. But why was he even held prisoner for this long in the first place? There are many possible explanations, however it seems the most likely is that William wished to keep Wulfnoth in case of a rebellion or resurgence against him as a remnant of Godwin's power. Well, that's going to be it, guys. Bit of a sad note to end on, but such is history sometimes. Nonetheless, I hope you guys enjoyed. If you had any recommendations for future videos or any constructive criticism, don't be afraid to drop them in the comments. So, with all that being said, hope you guys have a great day, night, wherever you are, and I'll see you guys in the next one.